Yeah. So take us back. So you were talking about before we got online here, you started washing cranes. So like help us.
Yeah,
You're
so
you're
yeah,
now
but
the president of Tadano Americas, but yeah, take us back to how'd you get here?
oh wow, that's interesting. So let me start all the way back. So how I got into the equipment business, I was actually walking with my mother, and she started to limp one day, and she took her shoe off, and she got a hole in the bottom of her shoe. And I asked her, I said, Mum, why don't you buy a new pair of shoes? As a young kid at school, and there was me, very formal in the UK, as you'd probably imagine, with a blazer and a shirt, tie. And she said, I can't afford it. We'll have to wait until the next paycheck. And I was quite shocked. So that weekend, I actually went to an equipment yard, and it was the nearest place to my house. And I said, hey, I just need work. I'll do anything.
Hmm. Where were you living?
I was living in Redditch in England.
Okay.
Yeah. And they said anything. I said, yeah, make coffee or do whatever you want me to do. And they said, how about washing equipment? Clearly nobody wants to do that, right? So I was washing equipment for several months, and they had a labor shortage. And from there, the workshop manager said, hey, do you want to come in and do some basic repairs? So I was doing basic repairs in the workshop. And the one day, just out of the blue, the owner of the company walked in. I was lying underneath actually it was a site dumper back in the day, and I was changing a drive shaft, and the owner of the company walked in. He kicked the crawler board, and I rolled out from underneath this thing, looked up, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get fired, right? The owner didn't want to speak to me. Well, it turns out, my mother and father actually own pubs in the UK,
Hmm.
and my mother and father separated, and he'd heard the story when he was at dinner that night, and they whoever was having the conversation with him said, listen, yeah, he was the kid who used to live in the pub was got all these dreams of going to college, and wanted to go to university, wanted to be an engineer, and
Mm-hmm.
same as his grandfather, and clearly he can't afford it anymore. And turns out that kid was me.
Hmm.
So he kicked the crawler board, and I rolled out, and I looked up, and again I thought I was going to get fired. And he said, hey, he said, is your name Dean? And I said, yeah. He said, did your parents own the pub in the town? I said, yes, sir, they did. He said, what happened? I said, well, a long story, but we lost the pub. He said, did you have plans for college? And I said, well, yeah, kind of. And he said, is that you still doing it? And I said, no, sir, we can't afford it. He said, you can now. I'm going to sponsor you, put you through engineering school.
Wow.
So that's how I basically got into it. So long story short, I left him actually still working with the company, but he sponsored to put me through engineering school. So I went to be an engineer and a tech,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to a place in Kings Lynn in the UK, and I went there, and then Stafford, followed by Stafford University after that, and with dreams about being an engineer. So I went back after I got my degree. Basically, went back to the equipment yard, and I went from making coffee and washing equipment to being the service manager,
Hmm.
which was kind of cool. It
Yeah.
was a little different. It was really uncomfortable at the time. You got, these middle-aged or, elderly people that you're doing everything for, and now all of a sudden they work for you. And I was in
Yeah.
my, late teens, early 20s when I got back.
Hmm.
And long story short, from there, very long story short, I ended up staying there for a couple of years, and then decided that I wanted to pursue the engineering side of my skills and go to a manufacturer.
Hmm.
Well, unfortunately, I couldn't get a manufacturing job because I hadn't got any engineering experience,
Hmm.
but I could be a tech. So I became basically a troubleshooter, global troubleshooter for a company called Benford, which was a small family-owned business. And that was back, 1996.
Mm-hmm.
So I travel around the world
Were they a
working on
dealer
equipment.
as well? So or how'd they get into the maintenance side of the world?
No, so Benford was a manufacturer. They manufactured
Okay.
site dumpers,
Oh, all right.
compaction, vibratory rollers, lots of different things.
Gotcha.
So I worked for them, traveled to lots of different places, Ghana, France, Spain, all over the world, Germany, the US, working on different pieces of equipment. They'd fly you there with a one-way ticket and say, come back when you're done.
Yeah.
And that was clearly 96 was before you'd have a global cell phone, right? So
Yeah.
you have to find a phone to call back whenever you thought the job was over.
Sure.
So long story short, I worked for them for a number of years, and it brought me to the US. Well, about the same time, Benford got acquired by Powerscreen, and Powerscreen then later got acquired by Terex.
Gotcha.
And that's how my affiliation with Terex.
Sure.
And basically I went from really washing equipment to being the global troubleshooter. I still didn't get the engineering job. I wanted it, but nobody gave it me because I hadn't got any experience, but I was a pretty good tech back in the day.
Yeah. Did you learn how to troubleshoot like hydraulics, electrical stuff in school then, or also did Bedford have a kind of a training program?
It was all at school, and then practical skills. They throw you in the middle of a country where you know nothing and know nobody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you find, I'm sure the learnings from that, I'm curious about the dealer network globally. I mean, probably saw some really good things that you brought forward and some areas of improvement. Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, I was just curious about getting parts to Ghana, or, I mean, did the dealer network have good parts accessibility and all that, or was it?
No, and the lead times, it's like ship. It reminds me a lot now. If you ship to different markets, I'm responsible for Pan America, right? So if you ship from North America to Latin America, anything can happen, right? It depends on what day of the week customs and how they feel and whether it's getting through customs. So you end up stocking a lot of parts local, but lessons learned from that have really built kind of what my area of focus is today. But yeah, parts is critical, and it always has been. Every business that I've been involved with, in really, all the way through Terex. I spent 23 and a half years at Terex. And, all that time at Terex, I did a lot of work on the parts and the customer support side of the business. That's critical to the success of a company.
Totally. So walk us that path. So you were at Benford then, and then mechanic, and then how'd you land at Terex?
Yeah. So when Benford got acquired by Powerscreen then got acquired by Terex, I think it was around 1998. Terex took over the Powerscreen business. Long story short, around 2000, I was traveling backwards and forwards, and wherever the issues were, right? Whatever country had the problems, that's where I was going. And I spent a lot of time in the US. And in fact, my oldest daughter, she turned around and, my wife turned around and said, hey, you're gone more than you're at home. You're not seeing your daughter grow up. And I was literally in the US for 2 or 3 months at a time. And then I'd go back for a couple of weeks and I'd be gone again. So I had to make a decision, right? Do I stay at Terex, or do I become a family man? And I actually consulted with my wife at the time, and she said, I think you need to leave. So I went back in, and I was about to give notice, and my boss said, well, don't leave, just move to the US. That's what brought me here in 2001.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's an opening. What you were at that time, were you a service manager then?
Yeah, so my first job in the US was service manager. So I was literally, instead of me training these people only to stick around for 6 months to a year and leave, I was the guy now, right? So there's no escape anymore. So it was me or nothing. And when I first got into the US, I lived in Houston. Which is pretty interesting how it does a full circle.
Sure.
And I was in Houston. I spent probably 4 or 5 months in Houston. And then I moved to Rock Hill, South Carolina, because that's where Terex Light Construction was, in Rock Hill. Worked there for a couple of years. And then in 2000, probably the end of 2002, I had a sales stint. And it wasn't by choice, honestly. It was, let me just say it like it is. I had a boss that I didn't really want to work for.
Sure.
And I would say we didn't get along too well. And there was a vice president of sales always looking for salespeople, and I said, listen, I'm going to try and be the best salesperson you've ever had. So I ended up in a sales role for 2 years, and it was interesting. In 2004, I ended up moving from Rock Hill, South Carolina, to Memphis, Tennessee, and Terex. For those that remember Terex's construction division way back in the day, I ended up going in there to run 50% of their service organization. So kind of went in and ran the compact equipment service team. And they had all sorts of challenges. First challenge they had, nobody liked each other, right? So they didn't want to play together. So I worked there in 2004, ran the compact service team, and then probably around 2006, I took over the whole service organization with Terex Construction.
And what were the product lines then for Terex Construction, then the compact?
Yeah, so it was interesting. It was a very complex division on the Terex side. So, they started very small. So they had small, 1.5 ton mini excavators, compact track loaders, skid steers, backhoe loaders, wheel loaders. I'm sure I'm missing something. There's a few other small products there, and rollers, obviously, site dumpers, that sort of stuff. And then when they got into the heavy equipment, then they actually went after. Terex actually was renowned for the articulated and the rigid haul trucks. So I had the rigid, the articulated haul trucks, Fuchs material handlers. Terex back in the day was private labeling equipment for. It was the Doosan excavator, basically.
Really?
It was a product that Terex private labeled for a while.
Well, and was the heavy manufacturing in Germany, or?
Yeah, so they used to manufacture back in the day. The rigid and the articulated haul trucks are manufactured in Motherwell, Scotland.
Oh, okay.
They had excavators, wheel loaders in Germany. They had the backhoe loaders in Coventry, and they had the track loaders and skid steers in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So it was all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to unpack your thoughts on just manufacturing going forward in the US, of course, and then North America at large and elsewhere and tariffs or, coming or maybe not, and all sorts of things.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a wild time. So where did you go then from there? You were 04, 05 roughly. You were a service manager at Terex.
And that.
Well, actually in sales, did you first sales job ever, right?
Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough. I don't know if you've listened to that Dave Ramsey thing where he talks about I was a crummy salesperson. I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was really successful. And it was by pure accident. There was no skill at all.
Yeah.
But the only thing that, my law of averages said I got to call on more people than anybody else because I'm a bad salesperson, right? So I did that a lot. And, it's actually kind of helped. When I look back on my career, the one thing that I think is important is you've got to do what you say and say what you do, right? That's the most important thing. And I think, really now at Tadano, I can actually, I can show that, demonstrate that. And, a lot of people ask, why should I choose Tadano? One, you got a great product. Two, you're buying it from somebody that you can call anytime, night, day, evening, weekend, right? So it's good.
Yeah. Tadano's got a really good reputation for quality and service, is what I'm not very much from the outside looking in, but yeah. So are you saying that in sales, you definitely, your effort level was high, just like the young man washing trucks. You knew how to put the effort in.
It had to be Zack.
And then you learned obviously that, a lot of folks, a lot of folks don't, do what they say, right? So
that's exactly correct. Yeah.
We found actually, you ever use the disc profile? It's like the Myers-Briggs, it's a personality profile.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's DISC, like dominant, independent. I'm probably going to misspeak on a couple of these acronyms. S, I can't remember, but then C is compliance. And I've done some collaborations with different business leaders, and for B2B sales, we found that high C's can actually be very good,
more effective
in sales because they're very methodical, and compliance based. They're not the old school sales mentality, or I guess picture people have in their minds is of kind of sometimes maybe a lone wolf or someone that's just relational and all that. But it's similar to the challenger sale, where a good challenger understands someone's business, their problems, but then the high C's for compliance, it's like they're very methodical about understanding pain points, budget, decision makers, and if there's a fit here, there it is. Otherwise, there's not. So,
and not it's interesting because when I'll tell you the funny story that I don't share often either. So I first gets into sales, and my first ever sales meet was in Memphis, Tennessee, and we ended up having to meet on the first day, which was the Monday afternoon, and then the following day it was training. The third day he had to present.
Mm.
And I can remember saying, I know nothing about the financing side, like
Mm.
nothing. I can talk the equipment inside and out, but I can't talk the financing programs.
Equipment financing for the customer.
Correct. Yeah. So I actually am very good friends with an individual that had, he was the whiz financing. He could talk retail financing, floor plan, lease. He could calculate on the fly. I mean, it was just an ace. So I remember back in the day, I always used to look at somebody's strong points and say, if that was my weak point, I got to learn this. I got to get close to that person. So I walked up to that individual who now he and I have become very good friends for the past 25 years. But I approached him and I said, hey, guy's name was Martin. I said, hey, Martin, do me a favor. What's that? I said, I was in the sales kickoff today, and I said, I figured out pretty quickly, the finance inside the business, inside out, backwards and forwards. And I said, and I think I know the equipment side better than what you do. How about you teach me the financing side? I'll teach you the equipment side. And you'll know everything about hydraulics and the benefits of our system and everything. He said, absolutely, I'm all in. Run over to the gas station, get a 12 pack and a pack of cigarettes, and then we'll talk. So that's what I did.
It was a crash course.
It was a crash course that evening. Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah,
it was pretty good.
Which part took more time?
I would actually say, I don't know. I'd say it was about even, to be honest.
I would think your part on the maintenance tasks and maintenance would be pretty involved.
Yeah, I was very naive on the financing side. When somebody used to say floor plan, I used to think they were talking about how the house was laid out.
Sure, I'm not familiar with that term for financing. What is that?
That's basically where you basically help a distributor stock equipment. Same as if you look at the auto industry, they've got all this inventory.
Gotcha.
They don't necessarily pay for it all at once. They're paying for it, paying for installments, basically.
Gotcha.
That's what it is.
Okay. I have so many manufacturer interview questions. Let's get to how did you go from what was your career track at Terex, and then let's get to how you got to Tadano.
Well, let me tell you, I had a lot of bosses. I think Terex definitely set a record with the number of people. I think I worked for probably 23 or 24 people over my 23 and a half years there. So it was roughly averaging one a year.
Could you share too? I know that company, gosh, I mean, they owned DMAG for a while, or maybe, and then they had various product lines. I mean, it just seems like the construction equipment space has gone through a lot of change. M&A, spin-offs, all that stuff. Like, what did you experience at Terex? And could you kind of walk us through some of the brands?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you look at the construction business, right? So they acquired Firmec, which was really the Massey Ferguson, the Agco, Case. That was all around that sort of same time, right? So they ended up with the Firmec business, which became the Terex load of backhoe. They ended up with the ASV business, which used to produce, or it may still produce, undercarriages for Caterpillar and the suspended undercarriage. They ended up with a Schaef business in Germany, which became basically the excavator and wheel loader, which was later spun off to Yanmar. And then the truck business, the articulated haul truck, the rigid haul truck, that was based in Motherwell. That ended up getting spun off to the Volvo group. So a lot of businesses on the Terex side. So I ended up on the sales side for a stint. But I had a craving to get back to the aftermarket side of the business. I loved the service side. The parts side was interesting to me. So I ended up moving the first chance I got, back from sales. I ended up trying to get back onto the customer support side because I really enjoyed that, right?
Yeah.
So, and that was fun. So I basically took over. I was a director of aftermarket for Terex for a number of years. And Terex have still got, I believe, a large location in South Haven, Mississippi. So I ran that business there. Actually, we had, at the time, there was about 200 employees on the aftermarket side because we actually staffed the warehouse to do pick, pack, ship, that sort of stuff. So I learned the operational side of an aftermarket business, which was kind of interesting. I did that for a number of years. And I applied for a couple of big jobs within Terex, and they wouldn't give me a big job because I hadn't got any real sales experience because I've been a sales regional manager for a couple of years, but I hadn't really, held a senior executive role. So I ended up leaving the, close to 200 employees at the time and ended up in a sales director role. And I ended up having 6 direct reports, and that was it. That was my whole team. So I went from almost 200 people to 6 people. And
So 200 on the sales.
On the aftermarket side.
Oh,
So
sorry.
parts distribution, sales, the parts distribution, parts sales, service, field service, call center, warranty, training, that side. There was about 200 people.
Yeah.
And then I stepped backwards, had about 6 people I was a sales director with 6 people.
Gotcha.
And everybody thought that I'd stepped backwards or I got demoted. And I remember that day when I accepted the position, my phone started to ring. People were saying, "Why did you take such a small job?" And I said, "I have to check the box on the resume."
Yeah.
So so I ended up in a sales director role. Got very lucky. I would say worked hard, got lucky, and also come up with a pretty good strategy, right? So we went after private label in a big way. And, one of our businesses, Grand Rapids business, was struggling for volume, and went in there to work with the general manager and figured out that if we can get some more product through there, we'll have a good business. So I went after private label with companies like Vermeer and Takeuchi. You can actually Google that today and see that arrangement. It's pretty interesting.
Huh. Products they still manage, probably.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're still producing products for. I don't think they're producing for Takeuchi or Vermeer anymore. Not what I've seen, but
yeah, that's neat. I mean,
yeah,
the Vermeer was that the Magic Mile plant in Iowa is pretty.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Pella. I've been out there before. So what were alternatives to that strategy? So that was a white label strategy that you decided to deploy, and that you just felt like that was the right fit at the time.
Well, I tried just about everything else to grow the business, right? So we had conventional distribution. We went after, we focused different channels. So we went after the rental channel, the big companies, the consolidators, I guess you can say, the general construction rental industry. And then, it was kind of like, okay, so I'm out of options. What else can we do to get another 1,000 or 2,000 units through the factory?
Yeah.
And we identified a need with some other manufacturers and said, they don't really compete with us. This would be a good addition. So we went after that.
That's
after private label.
Yeah. So, and then that must have been around 07, 06 to 2010.
Yeah, it was probably somewhere around 2007. No, it was after that, 2008, 2010-ish. We started to kick that off. And I think, 2012 was pretty interesting because I'd gone through several bosses during that period of time as well. And I remember saying to my former boss at the time, listen, I'm not going to, if you keep bringing people in for me to train them and then they leave and you bring somebody else in and I train them as well, or I'm the interim guy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stick it for long.
Yeah.
And, I think I'd said, here's the last chance, right? Next time my boss is out and I'm not the person, I'm going somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. Yeah. So my last boss when I was in the construction business resigned, or actually retired, should I say. And I didn't think the phone was going to ring, and one day it did. And they said, "Hey, guess what? You're the man in the hot seat." So it was pretty good. Yeah. Did that for 2 years.
And what role exactly was that?
I was a vice president, general manager of Terex Construction.
Nice.
Yeah. So I ran it was the Americas. Yeah. That's what we called it. Yeah.
And you had the confidence at the time, like you were sick of changing all the time and the turnover. And then, sounds like you've been with the company for over 10 years at that point.
23. Yeah. Well, my total time in Terex, 23 and a half years.
Yeah. Long
time.
Sometimes it's good just to set a boundary with an employer, right? Or a person.
Yeah. And I'd kind of felt, and I'd give this advice to anybody getting into the industry, right? Don't be afraid of different positions.
Yeah. Don't
be afraid to step aside. Don't be afraid to do something that's it looks like you're stepping backwards.
Yeah.
Focus especially when clearly I'm not young anymore, right? But when you're a lot younger, you can check all the boxes, right? To give yourself the experience to build that resume out.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. I see a lot of people in the industry now, whether it be construction cranes or whatever, and they come into the business and they've only ever checked the management job, right? Well, to me, that's a problem. And I think that's a huge opportunity, with the skill set that I have, and I've seen with many others, you walk back and have a conversation with a service team member, and I think you get a different level of respect and trust for them to communicate what the issues are, because they know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? I think that's helpful.
Totally. I couldn't
So,
agree more.
yep. And again, I still speak to the people that wash the equipment today, all the way
Yeah.
up to the CEO of the company. So
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah, especially, I mean, in mobile equipment business, just that is the product. And I mean, for you to have grown up in the maintenance side of it, and then I'm assuming in engineering, you learned some design and some
Yep.
physics and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And then, it makes sense why, GE should be run by a mechanical engineer. It's not a finance person, which
exactly
they've
correct.
had those
Yep.
issues, right? And so, yes, we've gotten to the point where you're VP, essentially general manager of Terex North America, right?
Yeah.
And how long were you in that sort of role?
So I actually took over as VPGM in the start of 2012, and then in 2014, the end of 14. So we started to, actually the first quarter of 14, we actually made money for the first time in the construction business.
Oh, wow. In North America or?
In globally,
Globally.
actually, yeah. But North America was a big contributor to that back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember making money for the first time, and actually our former CEO, Mr. DeFeo, who I respect at the highest levels, he said, "Okay, now we're making money. It's time to sell it." So, it was interesting.
Sure.
So
was it publicly owned at the time or privately held still?
It was owned by Terex, so obviously we're publicly traded.
Okay, I didn't realize. Yeah.
And so long story short, that would have been Q1 of 14, and then we frantically looked for buyers for the business, and we found homes for lots of the businesses, because it's better than writing a check to somebody to take the business. We actually were able to sell the businesses because now they're profitable.
Yeah.
A long story short, we got through a lot of that process by the end of 14.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that remember, oil, basically you could buy I think oil was priced at like $20 a barrel or something ridiculous. You could buy a bucket of chicken for less than actually you could buy a bucket of chicken for more than what a barrel of oil had cost.
Yeah. There's that 2013 to 14 drop, right?
It was the end of 14.
Yeah, that's right.
And Terex did a really good job of predicting the drop was going to happen. And they said, when it hits, the crane business is going to get really ugly.
Yeah.
And then the next breath was, hey, would you join the crane business? So.
Yeah. So did the sale, I mean, so backing up, it was Terex hoping to spin out just the construction business or several other businesses at the time?
At the time, it was just all that I knew was with the focus going to be on the construction businesses, right? So we, like I said, we sold the ASV business. We ended up selling that one. We sold the excavator business to Yanmar. We sold the articulated original truck business to Volvo.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Was that all before the oil crash or?
It was the end. It was towards mid to end of 14 is when we started divesting, and they all knew that oil was going to be in the world of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, there's a lot of crane business affiliated with the oil work.
Yeah.
And they felt that my skills were better suited in the crane division. I didn't at the time. Yeah. So the only commitment about move to cranes, and I'm not going to blame Ron for sure, but basically, I remember having the conversation. Listen, I don't want to build this thing up and try and fix it for you to sell it. And somebody, I can't remember who said it. They said, "Listen, Terex has been in the crane business for a long time.
Yeah,
we're not going to exit the crane business." And then obviously, fast forward, how I joined Tadano, right, 19.
But. Yeah. So that on 2x speed, because Terex crane business, I didn't realize they were separate. So construction was dirt equipment, sounds like, plus mobile equipment, and cranes were separate, and then that included at that time DMAG.
The crane business was really, so we had a Italian rough terrain crane.
Mm-hmm.
We got the Crespellano and Fontana Freighter businesses, and then we got we basically got a crane business at the time Terex had in Australia, which was the Frana product, and then we got the DMAG business.
Yeah.
And we built cranes in Waverley. We built the boom trucks. Actually, it was kind of a flashback to where I am now at Manitex.
Yeah.
We built the boom trucks. We had a crossover product and a truck crane in Waverley, Iowa. And in Oklahoma City, we actually had our lattice boom crawler cranes way back in the day.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I joined the crane business. It would have been, I think I went to a strategy meeting there in October of 14. And I remember thinking, this is a really good business. I don't know what the problem is. And fast forward 3 or 4 months, I had a different thought process. It was more like, what in the world have I got myself into?
It's funny. I think I met you around shortly thereafter. It probably was at an SCRA meeting in 2014, 15, 16. And then I remember I went down to a SICA meeting in Australia. I don't recall if you were there, but that's where I learned about the Frana.
The Frana product.
And and I met some, I think the simulation team was out of Germany. So the simulator, it was really neat. But help walk us through the kind of the sale, it sounds like, of some of the last assets. And because more recently, and then 2019, you joined Tadano.
So Terex, decided that, we closed the factory in Waverley, Iowa in 2016, and that factory had been there a long time, like 75 years, ridiculous. But, a lot of people didn't understand the financial state of that factory, right? It was being propped up with with lots of other businesses. But when you really dug into the numbers, there wasn't a lot of saving the Waverley, Iowa location, which was painful. I tried incredibly hard to do a 180 in that business, and for lots of different reasons. One, we couldn't get it in the black, right? And we had a tough decision to make in 2016, and that was, do you want to leave it in Waverley, Iowa, knowing you can lose money forever? Or, and hope and pray the market doubles, at least doubles? Or do you want to go ahead and move it to Oklahoma City?
Yeah.
And, I'd worked with Oklahoma City a lot, and the operating costs per hour were much less in Oklahoma than they were in Waverley. But I didn't give up. I actually focused on the Waverley business and rallied the team around, okay, here's a target. If we can get to this, I'm going to leave it here. If we can't get to this, I've got no choice. I've got to do something different. And I think there was a lack of belief, to be brutally honest. I think everybody said, this factory's been here for 75 years. It's going to be here for another 75 years, and this guy ain't going to change. Well, I wasn't, clearly there'd been a lot of leaders in that Waverley business. And the difference, I think, was I was absolutely going to find a way of delivering.
Sure.
And I really wanted to make it work in Waverley. I loved the people, loved the location. It was just unfortunate, couldn't get there. Oklahoma City was clearly the favorite. And so we ended production in Waverley in 16. We moved it to Oklahoma City. At the end of 16, we started to produce in Oklahoma City. And Terex made a big thing about, its campus location. And, we're going to have everything manufactured here. And it was interesting. Going into 17, I was still responsible for the manufacturing in Oklahoma City, even though it was part of the campus location. And
with other product lines,
with other product lines, yeah. So I didn't have the other product lines, but I had the crane piece. And then there was a decision made toward the end of 17 that they basically said, hey, we can't have a crane person running a campus, a piece of a campus business. So there was a transition made there, and long story short, I didn't like it, but it was what it was. So I just kind of went with the flow. I focused on the sales side, which is obviously I was going back to a basics, right? I do this, and we sold a lot of product, but we couldn't deliver it. They couldn't build it in Oklahoma City.
Oh no.
So I got frustrated, long story short, and I took a sabbatical. And honestly, I didn't know if I was going to go back to Terex or stay away and go do something different. And there was a conversation had, and Terex basically said, hey, we'll get you closer to Oklahoma City, but you need to come back.
Yeah.
So I went back, and fast forward, they decided to sell the crane business.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, you must have left and joined Tadano.
I did, yeah. And so we started having conversations with Tadano really, kind of around it was the end of 2018. And around July, I didn't know if I was going to go to work for Tadano. I didn't know if I wanted to try and stay at Terex or if I wanted to do something totally different. I almost did something totally different.
Yeah.
And Tadano basically said, "Hey, we've got a position over here for you if you want one." And I didn't think there would be an opportunity because they already had, they had a president in North America.
Yeah. Wasn't Ingo?
It was Ingo.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Great guy. Honestly, one of the reasons that I joined Tadano.
Yeah, great guy.
And long story short, Ingo did a sales number on me, and I guess my wife, when I got home, did another sales number on me. But my wife actually said, "You don't need a job like that anyway. You need something a little less stressful. And why don't you just sit back in a smaller position?" It was interesting. Tadano offered me a position where I would basically help integrate the DMAG business. So I would basically lead the integration in North America, which I did from August of 19 when Tadano acquired, all the way through 2020. So January 2020, we all know what happened in March.
Yeah.
And I led the integration of DMAG business. And then in January of 2020, and it was agreed at the time, so I knew what I was getting myself into, they wanted me to step into a customer support, vice president customer support and operations, which was basically like my Terex position when I stepped into the aftermarket role.
Sure.
And but Tadano did have a problem in the Latin America business because it wasn't doing well financially. Tadano invested a lot of money and we weren't getting the results we wanted to see. And I said, well, I'll run the aftermarket business and I'll stick with the. Let me give the Latin America business a shot because I already had DMAG in the Latin America side anyway.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing that for a while, 2020 right through 2021. And I think I'm gonna rewind a little bit here. So in 2020, a lot of people when they started to look left when COVID hit, and I would say one of my skills was to look right. When anybody goes left, I want to look and see what's on the other side.
Sure. And
you call it accident, you call it skill, you can call it experience, but I actually saw an opportunity and said, you know what, while others are dialing back, we're going to double down. And that's what we did. We built a call center. We invested in a call center for customer support. We used that time to start consolidating our parts warehouses. So I think it was 4 or 5 parts warehouses. We got into one in Houston. We implemented a ticketing system so we could actually be more responsive with customer requests. We did a lot of stuff to build the foundation of what you see in Tadano in North America, what our customers right now are enjoying.
Yeah.
And we really, kudos to Tadano actually. And it starts with the leadership team that when COVID hit and you saw all these people laying off because they got work, Tadano made a point of saying this is nobody's fault.
Yeah.
The industry will recover and we will continue to do what we think is the right thing to do. And they absolutely, as painful as it was financially, Tadano is very committed. Once they get after a project, they are absolutely going to execute flawlessly.
Yeah.
So they just kept investing, even as tough as it was financially. And, the fruits of that really started to come, I would say, as, in 21, things started to kind of normalize a little bit. And we really did really well.
Sure.
Parts business got better. Customers, perception of Tadano got way better, even though it was good to start with.
Yeah.
We really executed phenomenally. Actually, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for what happened back then. And everybody was after the initiatives. They supported it. At the end of 21, the very end of 21, had a sit down with our new CEO, Ujiya-san, and Toshiaki Ujiya basically said to me in December, "Hey, do you want to take over the as president CEO, actually president COO at the time.
Uh-huh.
And I remember going home and my wife said, I was wondering how long it'd take you to get back to the top. So it's pretty interesting. I never thought it was going to happen. Honestly, I just thought at some point, I'm going to probably do something different.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, I love everything about Tadano, the company, the philosophy, our core values, compliance plus safety, quality, and efficiency.
Sure.
And it's interesting, you see a lot of slogans that are out there by Tadano, right? Stronger together, take a closer look at Tadano and now, reaching new heights.
Yeah.
But they all mean something.
Sure.
So it's been really good. Tadano is a very committed equipment manufacturer. And I'll never forget my days at Terex trying to sell against Tadano. It was tough. It was really tough, right? You could go in with a product that was less expensive. You could go in there with, as good a support, but you certainly couldn't keep up with the Tadano product. And I think it's great to work somewhere where you've got such great equipment with, very committed owners.